Greetings, I am Tom Earl. On this week's episode, we share reflections on Caste, The Origin of Our Discontents, with Stacey Cosden and Lloyd Wilkey. Check it out. Woo! There we go. Greetings, I am Tom Earl, and this is my year of depth. We know you could be anywhere, so the fact that you're here today sharing your greatest gifts, your time and energy, means the world to me. I hope you know that in this moment you are valued, you are loved, and you are appreciated just as you are. As you can see, I am not alone. I have two amazing guests. Our first guest goes by the name of Stacey Cosden, and our second guest goes by the name of Lloyd Wilkey. What's going on, Stacey and Lloyd?
Hey, everything.
Happy to be here.
So before we jump into our conversation, and today what's going to happen is the three of us are going to talk about the book Caste, The-Origins-of-Our-Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. Before we jump into that, Stacey, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And then Lloyd, we're going to do that with you too. So why don't you start, Stacey? You can tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I'm from Baltimore, and I'm an educator for over 20 years and very, very, very invested in DEI, anti-racism, equity work. Also a proud marketer, and I love working with you, Tom. And I'm just really excited to be here. So that's me.
That's awesome. Yeah, y'all might recognize Stacey's been on past episodes. She's our lead coach here at the celebration, so we get a chance to hang out almost every day. Glad to have you here, Stacey. Appreciate you. Lloyd, you're now in the hot seat. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, everybody. So my name is Lloyd. My pronouns are he and him. And let's see, I guess I'd like to start out by saying, like Stacey, I'm from the East Coast originally. I'm from Boston. And but I've lived here in Los Angeles most of my adult life. So I don't know what that means, but it means something. I work. What would I say? It's hard. It's complicated. It's complicated. That's what I would say. I work part-time for something called the Museum of Tolerance here in Los Angeles as a part of my work, and so the topics we're going to talk about today relate a lot to what we study there at the museum. But I'm also the founder and the CEO of something called the Mindful Policing Institute. And I've been attempting to create curriculum and reimagine policing in America.
Yes, indeed. And Lloyd is a past guest. You'll recognize he has an episode with us called Mindful Policing. Also somewhere out there in the interwebs, Lloyd, myself, and Naila Mueed, we have maybe, 15, 20 podcast episodes that the three of us did together way back in the day. So
when they first invented podcasts.
Yes. So two people here that I really love and appreciate. So what's going to happen today, a little different than past episodes, is it's almost like a live book club where we are going to talk about Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins-of-Our-Discontents. Want to recommend that you go out and get this book. While we're going to read some passages and things like that, there is no way in an hour and change we are going to do this book justice. So please go out. Everybody was kind of, do I want to go here? I'm going to go here. Everybody is kind of, like, read White Fragility. Yes, great book. But, this is kind of one of those books that I suggest that you actually kind of skip to the head of the line and read this book right here. So what we're going to do is read some passages, and then we're going to talk about it. And we're going to read it directly from the book. So anytime we read from the book, it's a direct quotation that we are reading from Isabel Wilkerson. That being said, you're going to hear from me more than you usually do during most interviews. Usually during the interviews, I'm just asking questions, but I'll be a part of the conversation, and I'll also be reading some of the passages to get the conversation going. Any thoughts y'all want to add before I read the first passage here to kind of set the tone? All right.
Nope. Let's get into it.
For those in the podcast, heads are being nodded. We're going to do this. Okay. So I'm going to read from the introduction, actually, from the prologue. So this is going to be on page 16 of the prologue from Isabel Wilkerson. Going to read directly from the book. Here we go. There is a famous black and white photograph from the era of the Third Reich. It is a picture taken in Hamburg, Germany in 1936 of shipyard workers and 100 or more facing the same direction in the light of the sun. They are heiling in unison, their right arms rigid in outstretched allegiance to the Führer. If you look closely, you can see a man in the upper right who is different from the others. His face is gentle but unyielding. Modern-day displays of the photograph will often add a helpful red circle around the man or an arrow pointing to him. He is surrounded by fellow citizens caught under the spell of the Nazis. He keeps his arms folded to his chest as the stiff palms of the others hover just inches from him. He is alone in refusing to salute. He is the one man standing against the tide. Looking back from our vantage point, he is the only person in the entire scene who is on the right side of history. Everyone around him is tragically, fatefully, categorically wrong. In that moment, only he could see it. His name is believed to have been August Landmesser. At the time, he could not have known the murderous path the hysteria around him would lead to, but he had already seen enough to reject it. We might feel certain that were we Aryan citizens under the Third Reich, we surely would have seen through it. We would have risen above it like him, been that person resisting authoritarianism and brutality in the face of mass hysteria. We would like to believe that we would have taken the more difficult path of standing up against injustice in defense of the outcast. But unless people are willing to transcend their fears, endure discomfort and derision, suffer the scorn of loved ones and neighbors and coworkers and friends, fall into disfavor of perhaps everyone they know, face exclusion and even banishment, it would be numerically impossible, humanly impossible for everyone to be that man. What would it be like? What would it take to be him in any era? What would it take to be him now? Thoughts, y'all?
My heart is palpitating. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to sort of jump in. That is a topic that regularly comes up for me. I often ask myself that question. If I were there when the Nazis did what they did, would I have been one of the righteous among the nations, as they are called, who are honored at Yad Vashem for their stand against what was going on, or would have just been one of those bystanders, or would I have been actually involved in committing the violence? These are questions I hope I never will ever find out the answer to, except, the question is asked in that paragraph. The question is, what am I doing now? Because clearly there are some things I probably should be standing up about right now. Right?
Thanks,
yeah,
Lloyd.
I kind of had those same feelings. Just that passage just brought me into a spot where I'm like, what would I do personally, like in the name of self-preservation? Because that's kind of what it boiled down to. It was just trying to get by on their own, or just trying to kind of fit in. And do I speak? Do I stay silent? And we would all probably hope that we would be the ones to say something, but it's like, would you, when in that second your life is just on the line? Like, would you be strong enough in that moment to to say, this is not okay. And like me personally, I don't know the me now that I am probably would, but the younger me, definitely not. There was a lot of things in the name of self-preservation that I just let slide and bit my tongue and stayed silent on. So,
and part of that calculation involves my family, right? I'm not the only one that's going to suffer the consequences. And so, I think that would be a primary driver, my decision making.
It's tough in the world we live in now with the amount of access to knowing the atrocities that are going on for any of us to say, I'm an upstander all of the time, consistently. So I think for me, what comes up is just stepping into where she says, it's numerically impossible that the amount of people who say, I would have been that, like statistically, it's impossible. That then stepping into the discomfort of knowing somewhere in my life right now, that value that I think I have, I'm inconsistent on. And then instead of going into like denial or shifting the blame to someone else or scapegoating or bandwagoning, being like, do I have the courage to figure out where I'm inconsistent and then do something about it? That's kind of what it brings up for me.
Yeah. And, courage, it's an interesting word. Really it's moral courage that we're talking about. It's a different level of courage, I mean, yeah, I could say I'm brave and, I'd stand in the face of danger, but this is different. This is really different. You're standing up against your own people, right? So you're part of this is your people, and that really, it demands a higher level of courage. And I guess the question I keep asking is, how does one develop that, right? What goes into the development of a high level moral courage? Because I want to be that guy, I want to be it. And I'm still trying to figure out is there a pill for that or something?
Yeah, it's sometimes what seems like it would be like a superhuman amount of empathy. It's like, is that something that I've always wondered? Like, I feel like I can put myself in other people's shoes, and I'm like, but is that just like a natural trait? Is that something that we can like teach, train? Because you can tell there are people that have that empathy and there are people that don't have any at all. Like, it's kind of like a muscle that you have to flex, but does everybody have that muscle? Like, that's what I wonder. Like, is that in everyone? And some people are just ignoring it or like tamping it down, or is that something that we really can learn if we don't have that in us at all?
Well, I appreciate the way we're setting the tone. So Stacey, I'm wondering if there's anything you want to share from stuff you've read. I'm wondering if we can kind of set for people. I think for a lot of us, it makes sense. We hear caste. Okay, you mean like what happened in India? And so I think people kind of get it from just the title. Is there any definition or thoughts you want to give around what Isabel Wilkerson is saying is caste in the United States?
So in the beginning, I don't have the page number exactly, but this line really stuck out to me. She said, slavery wasn't an unfortunate event in an otherwise beautiful tapestry, but the fabric itself. So it was built on this system. And some of this was really tough to like think about and learn. Some things, intellectually, but just kind of the way that she compared the ways that we as Americans think, oh, that's not here, that's there, or, you know, how America kind of tries to separate itself. But, you know, based on some of these things, and she talked about that it wasn't initially like a race-based caste, it was a religious caste, and things were built on that. But then, oopsies, the slaves started to adopt Christianity, and then it just kind of moved into, oh, this is what we're going to use to as a hierarchy. So those divisions were like made and created, just like the divisions which are just kind of arbitrary, like the divisions in the Indian caste system. And she compared it to Nazi Germany. And a lot of my notes came from that that portion. I don't know if you were going to talk about this later, Tom, but this is what really got me when she was talking about Nazi Germany and the American caste system. Like, those are two, and the fact that the American caste system was inspirational for Nazi Germany. Really, it took me a while to get through that chapter because my stomach just hurt so bad just thinking about, like, wow, like this is how this was built. And it was built so good that, like, one of the other most horrendous things of human history was built on the way that America treated people. And even the Nazis every once in a while were like, ooh, that's too much. What? So that really got me, just kind of that comparison of, it's not just India, it's not just Germany, like, it's us, it's here, and we're still living that hierarchy.
Yes, those the Nazis had a lot to refer to before they got to us. Before they got to it, you know, there had been, you know, I think she wrote that the some of the best sellers in Germany were the eugenicists from the United States that wrote about these hierarchies of race and all this foolishness about brain sizes and skull measurements and all that foolishness. It was crazy. Yeah, and you know, the other thing too that wasn't indicated in there was that the Germans had also been involved in prior colonization of Africa. You know, before they got to doing what they did in Europe. They had been in Africa colonizing and destroying and you know, murdering and maiming millions of people down there before. So they practiced it. They had practiced it even before they got to the Jewish problem, as they called it. Yeah, it you know, you said something, Stacey, that sticks out for me. About reading this stuff, man. You know, I was when Tom said, you know how I got invited to this. The book Caste was sitting back there on my bookshelf, and he saw it, right, and he said, "Hey, have you read that? I want to invite you." And I was like, "Yeah, it's over on that pile over there, but I don't know if I'm going to get to it." Right. And this kind of goes back to your point earlier too, Tom, about, you know, prioritizing my reading, right? Because for a couple of reasons. One, because of the proliferation of books that are out here right now, and I keep saying to myself, you know, those books are for white people. You know, because I kind of already know that I'm in a caste system, and you know, and I'm at the bottom, you know, or close to it. I personally don't need to read this book, but you know, I should have it handy to hand it to one of my white friends. But also to your point, Stacey, that, you know, reading this stuff just enrages me sometimes. I mean, I had to take my time going through this because the stories, you know, they just hit home. I think about my ancestors. I think about my family members. I think about experiences I had as a kid growing up, and watching as my father deferred to white men, and how he code switched around them, and how he gingerly approached them, and that kind of thing. And I was always puzzled by that. And then when we were at home alone, how angry he was, right? That he had to do that. Some of the stuff just in reading, I have to tell you, it brought up some of that old stuff that was there, and how, and really it caused me to do a lot of internal searching too about how colonized my mind is. How often I catch myself still stuck in those cycles, and some of my own behaviors and things. And I catch myself, and I just get so mad. I get mad at myself. And so sometimes reading this kind of stuff, I just put it over on the pile back there because I know I got to be ready for it.
Lloyd, seriously, when you just talked about how you catch yourself in that. So, I mean, I've spent a whole lot of time trying to almost, like she said, she actually mentioned that in the book, like it's going to take deprogramming, because we are all playing these, we are a cast, as in like actors in a cast, and we are given the script and we are playing these roles that we were made to play. And when she talked about deprogramming yourself, and you mentioned like you get so angry with yourself, it's taken me a while because I get that way too, to try to give myself some grace in that, because I'm like, okay, it took 40 some odd years or whatever to like ingrain this into me, and it's not going to be gone just because I've decided I don't want to do that anymore. Like it doesn't just disappear. Like it's like a habit that you just slip back into. And I was supposed to do like this project with someone who was supposed to be devoted to social justice, and I just sat there and took microaggression after microaggression after microaggression and just let it happen until I was like, I can't do this anymore because I don't like who I'm becoming again. Like I had done so much work to get out of that, and I'm like, oh, I feel it. I'm slipping back into it. And it's like, it had to be a conscious effort to not slip back into those patterns, because, doing that work on yourself to not allow this to continue. Like, I don't want to be a part of this perpetuation, but it does. It comes back, and it's so easy, and it's so silent. It's like sneaky. Mm-hmm. It just happens. And you're like, wow, did I just let that happen for all this time? It's so easy to happen. And it's because they put so much work into building these roles. Mm-hmm. And that was another part that was hard for me, right? To really think about how much work they went into, like, making it, oh, the Black people are dumb. Well, they're not allowed to read. They're lazy. Like, and she said that's like the justification for the whip, and that human impulses to be free were criminalized. Like that line, that's a direct line. The human impulse to break free was criminalized. Like all of these things that they really put effort into putting into place just to make one group of people here and keep themselves up here was wild.
You mentioned about sort of not wanting to be I guess, kind of complicit in pushing this forward, right? I know that in our earlier conversation, you mentioned raising children, because we both have children, or all of us have children, I think, in this Zoom call, right? And I knew it going in, that as I was raising my daughter, that I did not want to pass that on to her. And that was all my life of raising her. It was to, I don't know, that was a conscious thing in my head always. I don't know how to, I actually don't know how to articulate this, but it was conscious. I needed for her to understand that there is no hierarchy, that there is no one above her. You know, it was really difficult. I noticed as I enrolled her in a school that was really diverse, culturally diverse and ethnically diverse, etc. And I watched her interactions with the other kids, and sometimes I'd have to ask her later on, how come you laughed when they were talking about the whatever, and we had to go through having these little conversations about these little the microaggressions. That's what they were, right? How come you let that one slide, huh? She's now 30, and so I don't have to worry about it so much anymore. But it's just all this stuff. I mean, just reading this text uncovered a lot for me, and I knew that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Me too. That's why I kept moving it down. Tom was like, "Have you read it?" And I was like, "It's on my list." I mean, it's high on my list, but I kept replacing it with other things because I just felt like, am I ready to do this? Yeah. But I'm glad that Tom brought it up, because that kind of forced me to read it and to make it through it and to really think critically about it. So thanks, Tom.
Me too. Let me say one more thing about that, and that is that I got asked once to speak at a church, mostly older folks at the church, my age and older. And the topic was Black Lives Matter, because this was a pretty conservative church, and the folks were kind of upset at the way these kids were behaving and, blocking traffic and doing all those things that they were doing. And so they asked me, because they knew I was a member of Black Lives Matter, would you come and talk to this congregation and let them know why you feel the way you do about it? And I said, I realize that most of us here are, some of us here in the room are kind of concerned about the way these young people are behaving. They're impolite, and they're aggressive, and they're loud and all of that. And, but we had to ask ourselves a question: who raised them? Right? It was us. We raised them. See, when I implanted in my daughter every day, we're not going to, I would tell her the history, the right history of what happened. And I think these young people today sat back and they heard us telling them the history, and they asking themselves, well, why did you just stand there and let that happen? That's what they want to know. Why would you just take that? And so as we impressed upon them the history, and we told them not to stand down, right? That's what they're doing. They're standing up, and so we shouldn't be angry for that. We should be proud. We should be excited, and we should actually be supportive, and we should be behind them in their endeavors. So that's a whole other story, and I think I may have gone off the rails. But you started this by making me read this book.
There are no rails. We're all good. It's interesting that you mentioned it is a really painful book to read. I'd listen to it as an audiobook, and then I'd have it on Kindle where I'd highlight. And I have almost over 300 passages highlighted, and I think there's like it's only a 400-page book. So it's just like highlight after highlight. But I would have to be honest, I'd have to discipline myself. I'd have my Apple Watch, where you're going on a walk, and I would be like, I am going to listen until the 40-minute mark of this walk, because there'd just be parts where you just want to sit down on a bench and just cry. And I had texted you beforehand, Stacey, and it was kind of like a privilege moment for me, where I was like, before you jump to this book, because you were like, I'll listen to it in like a week and a half. And I was like, this book is really, really painful. You're like, I can handle it. And I was like, it's true. Like, it is your reality. You know what I mean? Like, you walk around in that every single day. So it's a decision I make to, okay, let me step into this for 45 minutes and then step out. So that was a mirror for me. Just even your one-line response. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was like, I'll sign up for it. I'll do this. I can do it. But it did take me a little bit longer than I thought it would. But I was still done in like 3 days, because I was like, oh no, we got to finish this. We're going to do this.
If I met her, the question I want to ask is, I mean, it's such a gift that she's created for the world. This will probably be in, people will read this for a long, long, long time. But I just want to ask, how did you endure writing this? Because one of the things that she does so well is the storytelling that she brings in. I mean, there'll be chapters where she'll do, a 4-paragraph story, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one to just illustrate it. And I'm thinking, as a researcher, it has to research these individual accounts of torture and genocide, and to weave them in, while also she weaves in examples that she goes through. So it's just like that. And I think it took her 10 years to write, to be immersed in that. I mean, how did you maintain your health? You know what I mean? How did you maintain that would be the question that I just am curious.
As I'm listening to your question, though, I'm asking myself, imagine just being Black. That's probably going to be her answer.
Yeah.
Just imagine. That's
because it's almost like affirming when she would talk about her stories. And I feel like part of that, like, because we're gaslit so much. It's like a hobby. It's like sport, just to make us feel like we are going crazy and we're just making things up. Like, yes, you know what I want to do today? I want to be persecuted. No one thinks that way, but it happens so much that, like, to see these things like in the past and like in the immediate present, some of those stories that she went through, like, to say, like, and this is just like what happened to me in this situation. It does kind of help you get through that, because you're like, this is real and I'm not crazy.
Well, I appreciate the reflections, y'all. I appreciate you taking me up on this adventure. Go ahead, Lloyd. You were going to say something.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking about that. I'm still thinking about that question, because, I often kind of find myself in that. I mentioned that one of my jobs is working at this museum, the Museum of Tolerance, and we, a large portion of the museum is devoted to the Holocaust. And so I take people on the tours, and, groups of police officers and other people and teachers and students on tours of the Museum of Tolerance. And, we're going through there, and so, to go through and witness it. And then I have friends who are Holocaust survivors. We listen to their stories live. We're, I guess, probably the last generation to be able to do that. When I hear my friends tell me what happened to them, it's heartbreaking, right? And then I have, as you indicated, I got my own stuff going on. And then there are days, man, when I go to work, especially, on a day when I'm maybe confronted with a group of people who are disinterested in hearing about structural racism and maybe not so compliant. They don't want to hear it. But we have to have a conversation about racism. We have to talk about lots of different things that make people uncomfortable. Some days I just come home and, man, there are people who ask me why I do it. I guess I don't know why. There are days I come in and ask myself that question, because it can wear on your soul and take a piece of you right out. And it takes a bit of preparation going in, and it takes a lot of healing when it's over. I don't know what else I can say. I think I'm off the rails here.
I think you're being vulnerable and honest and self-reflective, and there's not always and let me conclude in this, in a way, kind of a way, which is totally fair, Lloyd. I guess where my question's coming from is, and y'all read me if I'm still off base here. I don't understand through lived experience, but I understand the everyday pressures and everything that in the heat of institutional white supremacy. And then on top of that, to live with that every day, to then research the most painful stories and then to chronicle them and to have to read through them and decide these are the ones I'm going to keep and not keep, all while still at the same time experiencing it in real time. That's the part that we were all saying, to go through and read it is like stepping into, this is going to be even more painful than what I already experienced. So I'm thinking through, that's her mission, is just to constantly every day be reading these things to then share with us. That's kind of where my question's coming from. Where do you find that extra emotional stamina? I don't know the word, to on top of what you're already experiencing, that, you know what I mean?
Has to come from a sort of a sense of a mission or something. It has to come, you have to be driven to do it.
It's kind of like you decide when you realize, what your giftedness is. And we use our gifts for all kinds of things. And when you're like, I am using my gifts for all these things, yet I'm still going through this discrimination, enough. So it's got to be that commitment to say, I'm going to use my gifts and everything in me to shine a light on this and hopefully be part of the change to end it. But I know that's not a thing that everybody can do. It's just because it wears on you, and you might be okay one day and you might not be okay another day. Like she was talking about the loss of, her husband and her mother, and, just your everyday stuff that everyone deals with. And then she's got the layers of all the other stuff. And it's just it's got to be a deep commitment to say, I will do everything that I can to make this stop.
Lloyd, I know one of the passages that you wanted to mention was where it talked about racism versus caste. And because that's one of the elements of this book that Isabel Wilkerson emphasizes, is why we should be using caste rather than race as the main problem. and casteism rather than racism to more accurately describe. So I'm curious if you still wanted to read some of that.
Sure, yeah, I will. Because that was one of the things I went into the book trying to understand too. I mean, we often use words without a clear definition, right? And we interchange racism, white supremacy, and caste, and all these different words get slung around, and I really kind of wanted to get her understanding. But so yeah, from on pages 69 through I think about page 70 here, yeah, it says, with no universally agreed upon definition, we might see racism as a continuum rather than an absolute. We might realize ourselves of the, we might release ourselves of the purity test of whether someone is or is not a racist and exchange that mindset for one that sees people as existing on a scale based on the toxins they have absorbed from the polluted and inescapable air of social instruction we receive from childhood. Caste, on the other hand, predates the notion of race and has survived the era of formal state-sponsored racism that had long been openly practiced in the mainstream. The modern-day version of easily deniable racism may be able to cloak the invisible structure that created and maintains hierarchy and inequality. But caste does not allow us to ignore structure. Caste is structure. And I just felt like that was really important because we're talking about structures. Caste is ranking. Caste is the boundaries that reinforce the fixed assignments based upon what people look like. Caste is a living, breathing entity. It is like a corporation that seeks to sustain itself at all costs. To achieve a truly egalitarian world requires looking deeper than what we think we see. We cannot win against a hologram. Caste is the granting or withholding of respect, status, honor, attention, privileges, resources, benefit of the doubt, and human kindness to someone on the basis of their perceived rank or standing in the hierarchy. I think I'm going to stop there for a second because she really says a lot. I think she really nails this idea that she's talking about the structure. I mean, once you're been identified as the particular group that's supposed to be at the bottom, then everything is engineered to make sure that you stay in your lane, that you stay in your place, and that the group that benefits stays in their place at the top of the ladder. And I gotta add this. Because I was looking for the word capitalism in her book. I didn't find it. I didn't find the word capitalism because she's right when she talks a little bit later on about if you make enough money, then you can move up into another level, right? As far as capitalism is concerned. But with caste, once you're caste, you're caste. You can't. So it doesn't matter how much money a black man has. He's still a black man, right? And I would have used another word, but I don't know who's going to hear this. It's the structure. It just weighs heavily on everything here. As we have this conversation, and I think I guess I really never thought of it that way. I always looked at things, more from the other view, race, class, all these other things. She's right. She's right. I mean, the structure, the skeleton of this whole thing is caste. Right?
Yeah. I had that part in my notes as well, and that you can't win against a hologram. Just that made me think, it's kind of this thing that's like, it's invisible. We can put our hand right through it. Like it's just this thing, but it's not a solid thing but we're kind of letting it be a solid thing, and it's in everything and it's everywhere, like every level of our lives kind of thing. And that really, it made me think, because it's like this thing that just kind of like shines over almost. To me, it's more like a shadow, but it's seen as this, like it's right. Like it's this thing, and it's just the way that it is. Like this is the way that it's supposed to be. This is the way that it will always be. The end. And it's just in every single aspect of our society and our lives. And it's wild to think about, but I love the way that she really broke it down in that part.
Yeah. Could I read just a little bit more just beyond that? Because there's a couple more points that she makes in the same section, right? Where she says, caste is insidious. That's to your point about it kind of being invisible, right? It's just like it's lurking, it's there, right? And therefore powerful, because it's not hatred, right? And this is interesting. It's not hatred. It's not necessarily personal. I mean, it's just the way it is, right? Right. And it is the worn grooves of comforting routines and unthinking expectations, patterns of a social order that have been in place for so long that it looks like the natural order of things. What is the difference between racism and casteism? Because caste and race are interwoven in America, it can be hard to separate the two. Any action or institution that mocks, harms, assumes, or attaches inferiority to or stereotype on the basis of the social construct of race can be considered racism. Any action or structure that seeks to limit, hold back, or put someone in a defined ranking seeks to keep someone in their place by elevating or denigrating that person on the basis of their perceived category can be seen as casteism. Right? That's the structure. That's all of the barriers. That's all of the privileges. Casteism is the investment in keeping the hierarchy as it is in order to maintain your own ranking, advantage, privilege, or to elevate yourself above others or keep others beneath you. And then here's the part that hurts. For those in the marginalized classes or castes, casteism can mean seeking to keep those on your disfavored rung from gaining on you, to curry favor and remain in the good graces of the dominant caste. Go ahead, Stacey.
That was going to be the next thing I talked about, because the line that I picked out about that was attempting to be the top of the bottom and pitting those at the bottom against each other to do whatever they can to put down others, to separate and rise above those like them.
Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord. So
and we see it all the time.
And we see it all the time.
Like, whenever I was like, I get this. Like, I've seen that. And that's that thing that separates it from that part, pitting ourselves against ourselves.
Yeah.
Is that separation from like racism and like the hatred, because it's not a self-hatred. It's like I said earlier, self-preservation.
Man. Yeah, so then that gives way to all those other things that we talk about. Colorism. Oh, when will we ever When will we ever get past it? I just don't know. I don't know how. My God, I've been trying ever since I was a child. You know, I'm in my 60s. I'm 65 years old. I thought it was over. And then I was in school teaching a class of middle school kids in the 90s, and I'm seeing it again. And I'm like, wait a minute. What? I thought we got past that.
It is still very much there. I have 2 biracial children, and they are looked at, and they know it. Like, my oldest just turned 15 today, and she will be the first to say, like, oh, I know they look at me. People have said to her, oh, I forgot you're Black. Or, oh, like things that like separate. And she's like, so do you think that you can say those things in front of me? Don't you know who my mother is? Like, do you think that that's an okay thing? But it happens, and it still goes. Like, she's like, oh yeah, I know they're, when they treat her differently than they treat somebody else in her class or whatever. We know. And we see it all the time, and we see how it's like, and the hope is that the good thing that I've noticed is that, like, this generation of kids that's coming up now, like, they see it, they know it, and they're like, no, we're not gonna do that. That's not okay. We cannot keep doing that. Like, they understand. Like, I grew up in the 80s. Nobody knew what colorism was, So, like, just now thinking about, like, having a name for it and having, like, those signs to look out for and shining a light on that is so huge. But just those passages really, it was like a gut punch and almost like I don't know how to describe it. It was like punch it in the gut in a good way and a bad way, because it's like, oh, you're right. I see it. That's it. Like, you've named it, but then at the same time, you're like, oh, whoo, I did that. Yeah. Like, you think about all the ways that you've played a part in that too.
Yeah. And this is all by design. We've been programmed. We've been had. we've been bamboozled, okay, all along into this thing, right? It goes back to the Willie Lynch letter, teaching us to hate each other. And this is the part that hurts me so much when I'm reading this stuff. And the lengths to which the dominant group decided to put their investment in time and effort into this. It's mind-boggling. I recently started reading another book that you might be interested in. It's called Embracing Survival. It's written by Didine Umunyana. So I've actually met this woman. She's a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, right? And she talked about, because it's impossible for us to understand how in the world were Black folks was killing other Black folks, and this was what is that about? How could that possibly be? But she says, in order to understand, you have to look at the history. And again, it was those Germans and Belgians that were down there colonizing, right? And these people who were living fine, together, who were called Hutus and Tutsis, and they were fine until they were classified and I could actually, if it's all right, I could, read you a couple of things from what she said in here. Rwanda was first colonized by the Germans and then the Belgians after the First World War. See, once again, the Nazis didn't just come by that in the Second World War. They actually had already practiced this. And before, where did she say it? She mentioned there were three groups of people: the Twa, the Tutsi, and the Hutu. And she said, prior to these artificial designations, a Hutu, by acquiring wealth, could become a Tutsi because they were really social classes. That's what it was. It was about, who had the money and who didn't, and you could move up to become a Tutsi. So it wasn't like they were ethnic groups, or they were kind of the same people, and they all spoke the same language and everything until these Europeans got in there, and then they made them a special a classification, and then they favored one over the other, right? And so then we have this thing that we were just talking about. I want to curry favor with the colonizer, right? And so and then I don't want to bore you with all of it, but I think you could get into it, and you could really see that. In 1935, Rwandan citizens were given identity cards labeling them Tutsis, Hutus, and Twa. Right, and so now it's on your birth certificate. It's like, wait a minute, and then they again favoring one over the other began the process of pitting the groups against each other way back then. And then, and we know what happened later. 1 million people or so slaughtered by their neighbors, right? And this was all a design, carefully thought out, and it's just one of those things. It just boggles my mind.
Earlier you had mentioned, Lloyd, about capitalism, and she doesn't talk about capitalism specifically, but she does talk about caste. Class. So I just want to read, because it was reminding me too of what you're sharing now, just one thing she has on class. It is the fixed nature of caste that distinguishes it from class, a term to which it is often compared. Class is an altogether separate measure of one's standing in society, marked by level of education, income, and occupation, as well as the attendant characteristics such as accent, taste, and manners that flow from socioeconomic status. These can be acquired through hard work and ingenuity, or lost through poor decisions or calamity. And this is her big distinction. If you can act your way out of it, then it is class, not caste. Through the years, wealth and class may have insulated some people born to the subordinate caste in America, but not protected them from humiliating attempts to put them in their place or to remind them of their caste position. And this is on page 106.
Yeah, I remember this argument, coming up during the OJ trial. Y'all might remember that. OJ, he was on trial, and black people were saying, hey man, you might have money, before he got off, they were saying, you might have money, but you just another nigga. You know what I mean? That's, and when he was able to get, prevail in his case, there was widespread celebration among black people. Not because they loved OJ, or not because they thought he was innocent, but because he had finally, burst that bubble that we've been talking about all these years, about the fact that no matter how much money you got, you're just still another black man in America, and you will not win. You're not going to win. But because he won, there was that was the big celebration. I'll never forget it.
Yes, that was definitely the heart of it. Like, because everybody's like, oh, he probably did it, or like, you know what I mean? But it was about like, did this just actually happen? Like, is that a Black man that did not go to jail? Like, it was just like shock. But yeah, that idea of caste versus class, like, you can be, I mean, scammers do it all the time. You know what I mean? You have all these like people that act like they're, wealthy, or just to get more money out of people, like, oh, I'm, making wine or whatever. If I went and I was faking the funk and pretending I was making wine, like, I might know all the words, I might know all the things, but that white guy that actually did that and made a ton of money off of people selling like bathtub wine, he did that. I could not have gotten away with that. Like, I could do all the things that he did, but nobody would just blindly believe me like they blindly believed him. And that's kind of where that separation of, also, that's a really fascinating story. You should, it's one of those things where you're like, how does this happen? Like, and then you're like, oh, it's just kind of that he pretended very well that he was in a different class. And because he was of a certain caste, people just went with it.
Mm-hmm.
Team, I know that we could talk about this for much, much longer. And like I said, right at the beginning, we are not going to do this book justice. Y'all, I want to recommend, please go out and buy this book. It is really, really important. We've been talking about this a lot on the podcast, especially to folks in the upper class, the upper caste, how last year, a lot of us were like, yes, Black Lives Matter. I care. I'm here. And we read White Fragility by a white author and like checked off the box. I'm good. I'm one of them. I have a Black friend. Go ahead.
I'm doing the work.
What'd you say?
I'm doing the work.
I'm doing the work. I'm including myself in this, y'all. Don't think because I have this podcast that I'm like counting myself as like the role model ally. Okay. And so a book like this, Stacey said it, the power of naming. We should name. And one thing that Isabel Wilkerson says in here is she can now tell from India which caste people were born into just by their mannerisms. And she one time talked to somebody and said, I can tell you're from the upper caste. And the person was like, I try so hard. And it's the same thing. We are so inundated by this caste behavior that there is something we are doing right now to perpetuate caste, even if we're one of the quote unquote good ones that we don't even realize. So this book gives you the opportunity to just name, to see ourselves, and to make the decision, as that's why I opened with that passage of the Nazis. Numerically, it's impossible that we all would be the upstander, but a book like this gives you more opportunities to do so. So get the book. And if you want to continue a conversation, Lloyd and Stacey are both doing fantastic work. So the both of you, we'll give you a chance to kind of conclude with thoughts. But before then, we want to make sure you get a chance to plug your work so people can go in and support you. So Stacey, why don't we start with you? Where can folks follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram, Stacey Renee C. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Stacey Cosden. Thank
you, Stacey. And Lloyd, what about you?
Best place to find me is at mindfulpolicing.org.
Nice. Appreciate it. Y'all, I appreciate you. It's always a risk. Your white friend being like, hey, you want to talk about this book on racism? Come on my podcast. And y'all took me up. You took the leap of faith. You humored me, whatever it took. So I appreciate you both so much for your friendship, for the wisdom you share. Go ahead, Lloyd. What were we going to say?
I just also got to mention that this is going to make a lot of white people mad. This book, it probably has made a lot of white people mad. There's this big controversy now about critical race theory, and oh my God, they're not going to enjoy any of the passages of this book.
But my final thought on it is kind of that it hurts everyone. And even though people of the higher caste think that they're thriving in it, they're not. And they're missing out, and we're all missing out. So that's all I have to say.
we like to conclude with an invitation. So what would y'all's closing invitation be? What would you like to invite people to do, to think about, to consider, to evolve into? And I'll buy y'all time and I will share my invitation is I want you to right now Google the name Devonte Hart, Devonte, last name Hart. This is from the book and it shook me to my core. It's the picture you might have seen from the November 2014 post-Ferguson protests. And it was at a rally in Portland, Oregon. You may have seen the photo. It's a young kid, young black kid, hugging a police officer, has a shirt on that says free hugs, has like a bucket hat on, and he's crying. And the backstory is so chilling. Was him and his siblings, 5 other black children, were adopted by white foster parents, and the white foster parents forced them, these kids, to do these performative things, forced them to wear these shirts and hug police, and they were abusing them behind the scenes, all while posting on their Instagram account how they're out here trying to get rid of racism and all this kind of stuff. And this is a trigger warning. This is about to become a chilling part of the story. They got all of the kids in the car and they drove them all off a cliff. And this was one of the photos that was circulated by the All Lives Matter community. And it's just, we have to follow up the story. That's my invitation. Follow up the story and really ask what's going on. Because this was for me, like, how did I not know this story? And there's so many moments you're going to have in this book of like, how did I not know this story? And the story is the United States. The story is racism. So that's my invitation. I hand it over to y'all. What's your invitation?
Am I allowed to drop?
That's true. I can't.
Another podcast real quick.
Say?
There's a podcast on the hearts.
Okay.
And I think it's like maybe 6 or 8 parts. And I just kind of cried through the whole thing. And that story was heartbreaking. So as soon as she started talking about it, it got me. But so look it up. There's a full podcast about it, The Hearts. But my invitation to everyone is to really investigate, like, not just kind of how you're benefiting from a caste system or benefiting or not, but like, what is one thing that you can do to break the cycle? We don't have to keep doing this. This is a cycle that was created. And just like something is created, it can be deconstructed, as she said, like it can be broken down, and each one of us can do something to break it down, to stop it. So what can you do in your life, in your circles, to stop this cycle and break down this caste system?
Man. Yeah, that's, for me, I could go on for the next hour, probably inviting people to do stuff. One thing I want to invite people to do is to use your imagination. We all have one. I just need us to tap into our imagination. I've been sitting around here and studying and working with this concept of the moral imagination. I don't know where those words came. Well, I do. I've been studying. They actually, these 2 words just came out of me, right? I didn't know that there had been people already working around this, but so until I Googled it, moral imagination. But what I mean by that, I'm thinking about, who do you think you are? And who do you think I am? I once went with my daughter to buy a car, and we were sitting there with the guy, and we did the test drive and all that. And then we went back into the office to sit down and, draw the papers up and whatever. And so I stopped the guy and I said, "Excuse me, sir, I got to ask you to do something." And he said, "What's that?" I said, "I need you to imagine that me and my daughter are white people. I know it's going to be hard for you to do, But I need you to imagine that we're white, because I've learned that most Black people pay more for cars than white people do. And I'm not going to be the one. Right. And so he was shocked that I said it. My daughter was like, "Oh my God, Dad, no." I'm like, but it's a reality. If you look, I want you to, that's what I'll invite you to do. Google that. Google that. How Black people pay more for cars, for homes, for insurance, how is that possible? What is that about? These are structural things that are happening all around us. And unless somebody is bold enough to say, you know what? I want the white man rate on this. Can I get that? Then it's not going to happen. And so it's going to take all of us to fix these problems, but they're structural problems, as she indicates. These are things that are in place to keep the hierarchy going, to keep people in their place. I'm tired of being put in my place. I really am. I'm tired of it. And I've been rebellious since I was about 17. It hasn't gotten me very far, but I'm going to invite people to be rebellious.
Lloyd, Stacey, I appreciate you both so much. This was so wonderful. Please go ahead and follow Lloyd, and please go ahead and follow Stacey. Please get this book, Caste, The-Origins-of-Our-Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. Y'all, thank you so much for this. I appreciate you both. And to those who are listening, as always, we're wishing you peace and blessings. Thank you. One more thing. I'd love to continue the conversation. Feel free to join me at tomearl.com/join. Subscribe below, or let's connect on social media. Tom Earl Artist. Thanks again for watching.